Bad Juice Cast.
This is Slaya from the Real Bad News Cast, and I am interviewing fan editor Wraith.
Hi.
Well, thank you for doing this fan edit. It was really cool. Honestly, I think that this should be like an official release. It really flows really well as like a 3-hour, 30-minute movie.
Well, that's flattering. I'm quite touched. I mean, it's happened before. Recently happened to Spice Divers Dune. That's had an official release on the German 4K as an extra disc, and it happened to another chap whose name escapes me, who did a fan edit of Raising Cain. It ended up in front of Brian De Palma, and he said to the studio, "I want to put this out as my director's cut."
Yeah, I heard about that. That's so cool.
I did this for myself for no gain, as an artistic endeavor and really an experiment, because it's a hell of a mishmash. So I'm guessing you liked it.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I should ask is like what drove you to dip your toes into fan edits?
Two things, I guess, and the extent of the two factors depends on the movie. Either I want to fix something that I think could be better or less annoying, or just it can improve. That's one driver, and the other one is actually I think I can do something different with this from a creative perspective. So some of the stuff I've done has been quite creative, other stuff less so. You know, drop the deleted scenes in, now it's longer. But here I just had a hunch that had been scratching at me since from a moment. I mean, I was editing in real time in my head when I was watching Glass. I was juggling things around, and it was taking my focus actually off watching the movie. And that fermented for a couple of years. So this was very much a creative thing rather than, oh, there's stuff here to fix. You know, it was can the story be told in half the time in a different way that engages you at least as much as Unbreakable did, and maybe even show you the genius of M. Night here? Because I think a lot of people gave him a bad rap, particularly on Glass. You know, we're talking about nearly 20 years between these last two movies and Unbreakable. And so, you know, people aren't going to slap Unbreakable into the machine and then run off to the theatre to see Split. Well, the Split they didn't know, and Glass, the expectation then goes through the roof. But his discipline on Glass, when you look at the other two movies, is hopefully something that my juggling shines through. So those are the kind of drivers here.
What were your thoughts on the trilogy, Unbreakable, Split, and Glass?
Unbreakable is, in my opinion, one of maybe a dozen movies in my catalogue anyway, which I consider to be perfect films. There is nothing you could add or take away from it to make it better. Having said that, I use barely 40 minutes of Unbreakable in this edit, 45 minutes. But that's because I chose a particular thread to extract from it. You know, when looked at as a whole, you actually need the other scenes that are there. Unbreakable, I think, is fantastic, or probably better than Sixth Sense in many respects. Split, of course, unfortunately, I knew it was connected. I didn't know how it was connected, really. But by the time I got into the theatre, it pretty much worked out that Bruce Willis was going to turn up. And the clue for that is something that Shyamalan actually said in interviews back at the time when Unbreakable came out. I can't remember if it was an issue of Starburst or Starlog or Cinefantastique, one of those. And he made it really clear way back then that Unbreakable was part of a planned trilogy. And the first film was about establishing the hero's origins. The second film was going to be about establishing the bad guy's origins, and the third film was going to be the showdown. And of course, the reason no one saw it coming in Split is everybody already thought the bad guy was Mr. Glass. So you're watching Split and you have no idea that Kevin Wendell Crumb, the Beast, is actually the setup for the bad guy. None at all. And then Glass, I think the problem with Glass, and I liked it a lot more than most. And probably because I could kind of like feel what I think might, and this is conjecture and supposition. I have no reason to believe this, and I'm not stating it as fact. I
Mhm.
think, I think that with Glass, somebody probably insisted that this movie needed to be able to stand alone in case people walked in not having seen the other two, and yet it needed to also fulfill the expectations of the other two movies. So you've got an unusually long film for M. Night, 2.25 hours, 2 hours, 20 minutes. You have truncated pieces of exposition trying to fill in the newbies on what the bloody hell's going on with these characters, while not repeating it too much that you lose the interest of the big fans. And I think that diluted its impact for people to a great degree. So again, one of the things I was hoping to achieve by unifying them is removing some of that re-exposition or redeploying it in a manner that would engage. So that's my view of the three of them. I also took exception to people going, "Oh, it was a crap ending. This manufactured, contrived secret society." It's like, guys, it's at the 40-minute mark in Unbreakable. In the answer phone message, David, there are unseen forces. Yeah, it's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Doodah Society, it's there. It wasn't called the Black Clover Society. And boy, I wish I had the technical skills to rotoscope a clover onto that girl's belly when she walks onto the train at the beginning of Unbreakable. We've been trying it, but we just can't make it look good enough.
I think the problem is because I really, really enjoyed Split, and I think Split was on such a high level, and as well as I also really enjoyed Unbreakable, and it just didn't, for me at least, it didn't seem like Glass could really quite deliver on that level, and I think a lot of people were also kind of disappointed, what they did with Bruce Willis' character and stuff. I guess they kind of expected his death to be made. Well, if he was going to die, make something more epic. I've heard people complain like, "Oh, they just kill him off in a puddle." It's like,
I've thought on that. I mean, I was convinced we were going to get a big showdown while I was watching Glass. It was like, it's being telegraphed. Here it comes. You don't show the gun in the drawer if the gun's not going to be used. It's the building. It's the chemical plant in the skyscraper. Here comes the showdown. Oh shit! He died. Oh, that's a bit unexpected. Oh, it's over. But as time has passed, it's the credible ending. It's the real ending, grounded in our physics. It's what would happen in the real world with these people that are extraordinary, but not so not so extraordinary that they defy plausibility.
mhm.
So how else could you have ended it and still had that credibility? Okay, yeah, he could have had a more violent death, but then that wouldn't tie in with his fear of water, his susceptibility, his kryptonite.
Yeah,
That would have been a betrayal of the universe that Shyamalan set up. It's one of the reasons why the Matrix sequels fail. They're not true to the universe that's set up in the original. The rules and the drivers of the characters are thrown to one side in those two movies, and that is why they fail.
right. I do enjoy the tweaks you added to when that happens. It does make it more. It makes it flow a little better, having like kind of the flashbacks sort of integrated with the conclusion of the film. That's what they
And that,
should have done. They should have done more. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you, but they should have done
no, it's okay.
more, a bit more kind of flashbacks to the film instead of just re-explaining for a good portion of class, like you said, trying to like get people who haven't seen the first two to watch the third one. I think that was a mistake, most likely by the studio.
Yeah, I think the problem with that is that you'll continuously lose the, as it were, the aficionados. Oh, here we go again. You're showing me that because the people the other people in the auditorium don't know what was going on. A lot of serialized television suffers from that re-exposition. Star Trek Discovery comes to mind. That's an avalanche of repeated re-exposition for people who might not have tuned in last week. It's kind of like, seriously? Do you have that little confidence in your audience that they won't be able either to work it out? And the reason I used them in this edit was different. It was to have a balance and a thread all of the way through. I mean, most edits I do linear, and
Mhm.
I actually create them as I go. This was very different. This had extensive planning to it. I was thinking about it for 2 years, and finally pulled the trigger on creating it initially in a spreadsheet, just
Mhm.
writing down all the scenes and all of the different sequences. And you can see this in the making of video, where I go into real detail on the structuring. And because glass is so self-contained, it would feel like a bolt-on on an edit like this. So the only way to make it not feel like a bolt-on was to move key reveals and sequences into the body of glass. That's why the handshake between Bruce Willis and Elijah happens when he gets the lobotomy treatment done. It's held back for a lot longer than it was in the original movies. That's why the reveal of when Joseph realizes that his father is a superhero happens when he's speaking to Dr. Ellie Staple. By moving those moments into glass, you force a unity of the narrative, but you also drag people's interest through the narrative for longer. And that was probably the biggest challenge of all. One of the things I'm surprised at, but yet I'm flattered by, are consistently the reviews that say, I can't believe it was 3.5 hours. I started it and I couldn't stop watching it, and I was dragged along.
I was actually going to compliment you on that. Because yeah, at first when I went to play it, I was like, man, 3.5 hours. This is like one of the longer fan edits I've seen. I was like, huh, like I was kind of thinking like, how is this gonna go? 3 movies into 1 movie, but yeah, it worked, and the time just. I'm not saying it was too fast or anything, but the length felt right. It was just like,
Yeah.
huh. I was like, all right, all right.
Well, there were a number of things that went into that, and again, when Art first saw this, and I should probably say Art is another person on the fanedit.org website
Yeah.
who's very involved there. And when he first saw it, he messaged me, and he said, "I don't think you realize what you've created." And that's actually how our dialogue got going. And I started going into detail with him on this. And I knew I was going to be doing a flashback structure on this, but I hadn't decided what the balance would be on that. And what I mean is, initially, the first thought was this would be glass and it would be peppered with flashbacks all the way through.
Mhm.
And I laid that out in the spreadsheet and I looked at it, and it didn't have the emotional drag. And I even did a quick assembly just to see what it broadly felt like, and it was missing the compulsion. So I thought, okay, let's be scientific here. Let's not be artistic. And I thought, right, let's think about flashback movies, Pulp Fiction, The Killing. That's Stanley Kubrick's The Killing, for those who might not be familiar with it. DOA, the original 1940s one. And I took about half a dozen of these movies where flashbacks were integral to the structure. And I literally sat there and wrote down how long the flashbacks were relative to the principal thread. for each section. And what came out of that analysis was some interesting things. On average, the sections of the movie didn't last more than 10 minutes, but they tended to get longer, each of the sections, towards the end of the narrative, because by then you've engaged the audience. And the number of scenes in the sections grew. And that's relevant from an emotional perspective, because if you have 10 minutes of film with 3 scenes and you have 10 minutes of film with 30 scenes, the 10 minutes of film with the 3 scenes is going to feel twice as long as the other 10 minutes.
It's funny because Pulp Fiction did come to mind, but I think that's also because of Sam Jackson and Bruce Willis being in the movie. But it did kind of have that with the flashback structure and whatnot, and the way the story was. But no, it worked. It worked.
So that's when I decided that the flashback could work, and I didn't need to have Glass as the anchor. But then that created a different problem. If Glass wasn't the anchor, how do you then make it not feel like a bolt-on? The answer there is flash forwards. So this assembly is a combination of sort of flash forwards and flashbacks. So I used elements of Glass to frame the earlier portions of the movie. Therefore, Dr. Ellie Staple is not a bolt-on character because she's the first person you see on camera.
Right.
And then Elijah's mother. So I used Elijah's mother and Dr. Ellie Staple as the anchors for those initial scenes. And then to keep the interest up, I literally took a page out of Pulp Fiction in that respect. I broke the chapters down and reorganized the scenes to fit the characters. So that was very deliberate. It's very deliberate that it starts off with David and Elijah by their names and Casey. But then in the next block, it's Mr. Glass, the Green Guardian, and the Beast. As opposed to Kevin, those two kind of like interchange. And then in the last block, it's no longer about the people, it's about the events. So there is a 3-act structure to this as well. So structuring it to meet those requirements was a nightmare. It's really obvious when you see it done, but it was a nightmare. And right up until the 90-minute mark, and Art can tell you, right up until the 90-minute mark, I wasn't convinced I could pull it off, and I'm still not happy with the transition in the middle, because I had to use the diner scene, and because I had to get Elijah into the asylum, and there weren't many choices there. I couldn't show the scene at the end of Unbreakable because that reveal was coming too early emotionally for a 200-minute movie. There was just no way it could go there. I needed to drag that out. So the other choice was either to put together some cockamamie montage that wouldn't work, or use the diner scene. And the problem with the diner scene is Bruce Willis looked materially different, but also it uses the exact same piece of music as the station reveal. And I needed to find a way to modify that. And there wasn't a good clean 5:1 separation on the Blu-ray to remove the music on that. Fortunately, I decided to check the DVD, and for some bizarre reason, there's a very good separation on the DVD. It's about 80% in the rear, which then allowed me to overlay a different arrangement of the same track so that it sounds different in tone and mood and ends on a low. Because the original version of this, that crescendo that comes at the end of the diner, was really throwing the mood off, and I managed to be able to eliminate that, but that was a nightmare. Funnily enough,
This is that's some technical stuff I don't think I would have ever thought of that a fan would have to deal with, but Blu-ray versus DVD audio tweaks of how the channels can be separated and stuff. That's very interesting.
well, normally on a 5:1 mix, the music is in the rear channels. You'll have about sometimes 100% in the rear, but usually it's an 80-20 split. And the dialogue is almost always in the center channel, a little bit on the left and the right. So you can extract dialogue cleanly as well. But it varies between DVDs and Blu-rays. It even sometimes varies by region. And there's actually a page on the fanedit.org website, which is, here are a list of good 5:1 channel separations. You know, in some cases, it's this release, the Japanese DVD's got a clean center channel.
Or sometimes older movies will get like a redone soundtrack, and you have to like hunt down other releases, like the Terminator, for instance. The 5.1 remix has different actually sound effects than the original mono track, and
yeah, you get variations like that, and but yeah, it was an interesting challenge. The funny thing is, for the parallel version, which I don't think you've probably got round to seeing, Unbreakable Glass Split. Now that edit,
I've seen the trailer you released, but I believe you're still working on that, right?
that's finished. I mean, that's finished, but it won't drop until March.
Okay.
But it's a completely different approach. Spoiler alert, so I'll just quick spoiler alert for people listening. They can pause or wind forward or mute for about 20 seconds. Casey is not in Unbreakable Glass Split, and neither is Mrs. Price, and neither are any of the elements of the abduction. The story is told from an emotional perspective, and it's so Audrey is in it, Dr. Fletcher is in it, and the end is very different, because if Casey and Mrs. Price aren't in it, is it possible to have the finale of Glass without them? And the answer is yes. And I won't spoil it any further. But the solution to the transition of getting Elijah into the asylum is handled very differently in that. And I won't say version, because it's not a version; it's a parallel edit. I mean, none of the material from Split in that is used in Split Unbreakable Glass. Completely different material, and 70% of the material from Unbreakable was not used in the edit you saw. So it's a very, very different beast.
Interesting. That's really cool. I mean, you did so much crazy work on this, and I think that you're just like, you know what, I can do it even differently now. Is
well,
really
that came about by accident. I'd love to take the credit and say, oh yeah, I planned this. It was a Machiavellian plan. It wasn't. It literally, I had all of the. I'm a bit OCD about these things. When I remove material, I put it in a folder, and I then create a file of material I've removed. It's a bit crazy. The first time I did that was actually when I did my Hobbit edit, where I removed 5 hours from it. And when I played back the removed 5 hours, it was just unwatchable. Just unwatchable, not because of narrative or anything, but because it was all of the horrible, clunky stuff that everybody hated. Whereas here, I looked at the material I'd taken out, and I thought, oh my God, the story's intact. Here is all the material I took out, and the story still works. And I thought, I think I can tell it again from a different perspective.
Nice. What would be the most alterations that you discovered or did that you're just most proud of through deleted scenes, or like you're just like, this is so much, like just like really proud that you were able to tweak it and really create something unique?
There's probably two moments. The big one for me is the station reveal.
Yeah.
I knew I needed to retain it, and I knew I needed to accomplish more than one thing with it. And I'm not specifying so that people listening it doesn't spoil it for them. But that intercutting that I had to do on that, I wasn't 100% sure that it could be done, and that if I did it, that it would work. And part of it happened by accident, and you can see this in the making of video. I mean, I own up to it. I mean, there are moments of serendipity when you're editing a movie, and and M. Night and any other director will tell you the film is made in the edit suite. There's no question. There was a moment where I was intercutting between old David and young David, and you'll know the material I'm talking about with the old David. But I was retaining the audio from Unbreakable. That was key. Now I made changes to it, and I made certain edits. There's a portion where I had to extend the score, and another portion where I had to shorten it. So I had to take the CD and mix that custom, and then lay it down. But there was a moment where I was dropping in the material from I'm getting confused here, from Glass with David onto the music, just as a rough positioning. And that moment where the music goes dun dun boom, boom, dun, and David's head turns almost in time to the music, and yet it was from a different film. It's from Glass, and I thought, oh shit, magic. Oh my God. So of course I then had to tweak everything that preceded it so that I could bring that moment just a second and a half forward and line it all up perfectly. And when I had it lined up and it worked, it just suddenly felt like it had been made that way. That's when when you're editing, that you got it right. It just feels like it was made that way. So that was that was a huge moment. Had I not pulled off that central section, I would have abandoned the edit.
That's really cool.
Period. The other bit was, I very early on, once I knew what the structure was going to be, knew how I was going to start it, but I wasn't sure if it was too much or too little. So I assembled the opening with Dr. Ellie Staple. There are edits in that to make it tighter in the dialogue. And I put it out to a couple of fellow fan editors. And I said, what do you think of this as an opening for a forthcoming project? And their heads burst open. And it was like, yeah, okay, this works. Because it's a big reveal right up front. But the benefit of that is that the way I structured this is, as soon as it starts and gets going, I'm dragging out your doubts. I'm presenting the doubts that M. Night put in there, and I'm dragging them out even further. Notice that when Elijah falls down the stairs, you don't know if he's seen the gun or not, and the guy who jumps the barrier. And I deliberately moved that to David. Now, the reason for doing that is I needed to keep the audience going. So I'm pretty proud of that, because I knew I couldn't do the station reveal as early as M. Night had done, because I was trying to tease people, but I had to give them hope. So by flagging earlier that he may have some power, but maybe he doesn't,
Right.
was the other sleight of hand I'm pretty proud of. I mean, there are harder things in there, but those are moments which, and that one was simple to pull off, and yet I'm really chuffed about it, because it makes a big difference to the emotional temperature of how the film grows.
Yeah, you did great work. Just felt like it should be its own long movie. I'd be really curious to like I said, if this was like an official release, and just like people who maybe didn't see the other three, just like check this out with fresh eyes. I bet, like, I don't know, I feel like people would think like, if, or I guess the best way to say it would be if someone didn't know that Unbreakable, Split, and Glass were three movies, and they watched this, they'd probably think like, like that it was one movie. Of course it'd have to have different titles. Well, you know what I mean? Like the way it's put together, it feels like a full, fleshed out story. Yeah, you did great.
Well, thank you. I
Yeah.
mean, I really was conscious of other edits that weld movies together. Even one of the ones that I've done out there, AVP Outbreak, and you know, people say, yeah, it's really nice and all the rest, but it feels like two movies welded together. And I really didn't want this to have that accusation. I wanted to engage people at a deeper level, and the only way to really do that was to put this thing through the blender, literally. I mean, if you see the spreadsheet in the last half an hour of the making of Split Unbreakable Glass, if you see the spreadsheet I had to put together, both to track this and to make sure things weren't being repeated and their mood and their balance and all the rest. And that isn't even the full spreadsheet, the one I showed. You know, I also rated the scenes for emotional temperature, as it were. You know, is this a high, medium, or low emotional scene? Is this scene high, medium, or low on plot? You know, and which characters are in which scenes? And then I had to reorganize them so that each block had only certain characters in at certain times, or each block didn't go above a certain emotional or plot temperature threshold, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to drag people through it. They won't crave it. They'll just become impatient and bored.
Right.
So yeah, there were a lot of things I was both trying to avoid and achieve on this, and I'm flattered that that it's worked, because it could have been a car crash.
Yeah. What I've learned from the various fan edits I've seen is you know, among having a good director and a good team on something, there's very few that can pull off also editing, and that's what you really need, is a good editor. Like if I was going to give advice to people who are new to filmmaking, would probably be, don't be your own editor. You know, sometimes you don't have the resources and you got to do it, and there are a few directors who can do it, but man, I would say, like, if you're to like anyone who's like an upcoming filmmaker or whatever, like get an editor, give them what you're shooting, and be like, and just see what they can do, because you know, filmmaking is a team effort, and like because some of the fan edits I've seen, I'm just like amazed, like what you can take with something, and especially if it happens to be something that maybe wasn't all that well received. One would be the Coming Storm fan edit of Terminator 3, which trims a lot of the goofier moments, kind of makes it more streamlined, more serious, and it's just amazing what an editor can do to improve something. It's
Yeah,
really really neat.
as a viewer, it's wonderful when you see something in a different light, perspective, or creativity that makes you go, wow. I mean, the first time I had that on a fan edit was Pulp Empire.
I don't think I've seen that one yet.
um, it's it's only 90 minutes long. It's The Empire Strikes Back, and it's been rediced, funnily enough, into a non-linear structure like Pulp Fiction. But it's also been rescored with Pulp Fiction style music and Ennio Morricone cues.
I think I've heard. Yeah, I've heard of this. I haven't seen it yet, though.
Oh, and when I read it, I thought, oh, this is just such a car crash. What a mess. This is going to be such a piece of crap. But I was curious, and I loaded it up. I thought, it just can't work. I've seen Empire 1,635 times, and that's just this week. I know this too well. And within 5 minutes, I had completely forgotten everything I knew about it, and was captivated beyond belief. I was stunned, absolutely stunned, you know. And it's nice when it happens to you. And I was hoping with this to maybe create a small element of that. But you really need to see Pulp Empire. For me, it's one of the outstanding reimaginings of a movie beyond anything. I mean, I couldn't have done that, because I don't have the patience to do that degree of sound and music work. And I did do a
I,
lot of sound work on this. You know that scene where Dr. Ellie Staple walks out of the asylum, and she walks across to the car park and she hits the car alarm on the door.
mm-hmm.
None of the audio in that's original. None of it. From her footsteps to the ambient night sound to the music used and the car alarm, because the car alarm's out of sync in the original release. And I needed to completely rebuild the audio on that because the emotional cadence, the temperature was wrong. And I needed a scene to break up the two scenes that are on either side. And that was the one I chose to use, but I couldn't use it with the original audio, and I couldn't just replace the music because the separation wasn't there. So I had to do a complete rebuild, and synchronizing her high heels
Oh
across that
man.
car park was a nightmare.
Yeah, that's another interesting thing too, because not only do you have to re-edit stuff, you have to also have to do audio stuff, as well.
It's not fun. Sometimes it is. I mean, and
Yeah.
sometimes you have to do some little sleight of hand. I mean, there's a moment early in the movie when David and Joseph, and that was a very hard scene to re-edit. When David and Joseph are in the store, I needed to not reveal the second abduction because it's not in the movie. I needed them not to make reference to the girls. I wanted to get rid of the Salt Bay your ass line. I don't like that line, and I needed to get rid of the quips in the drawer on the pad because it was a little bit fan servicey, and it just didn't fit the mood of this edit. And there's not a
Mhm.
lot of footage there to play with because Bruce Willis walks in, disappears around the corner, and in the early versions, suddenly he's sitting at his desk, and I needed him to approach David and Joseph. I needed David to approach Joseph at the desk, and the trick there was to bring a shot forward where where Joseph turns around to his dad and and makes a comment, but actually replace the dialogue, and yet it needed to look like the dialogue, otherwise the lip sync would be out. Uh, and I took advantage of a thing called the McGurk effect. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No.
It's a really interesting thing if it's done properly. The McGurk effect is how your brain perceives sound versus what comes into your ears versus what you're seeing the person speaking doing.
Mhm.
Uh, have a little Google of it and look up the McGurk effect, and you'll see a guy say a word, and the word he says bar, B-A-A. It goes bar, 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 and then they replace it, and you hear him say far, 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 F-A-R, F-A-R. In both cases, the audio is the same, but what they've changed is the image of the man on the screen. Instead of him pursing his lips to do the B sound, he flashes his teeth at you as he does the F sound. And your brain goes, oh, that's an F. And that nebulous R sound that's being played to you, bar, 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 your brain goes, must be an F, the word is far. And it's not.
Fascinating.
So I did that when Joseph turns around to his dad. As he turns around, I positioned the new dialogue to line up with the old dialogue. And it's also helped by the fact that he's turning his head, and it pulls it off. But actually, what he's saying is completely different. But your brain welds the two together. I also used that trick in my Superman edit as well to replace Marlon Brando's dialogue in The Fortress of Solitude.
First fan edit of yours I've watched, but I definitely want to check out your other work. It's been a pleasure checking out this edit, and also
Thank
talking
you.
with you and just learning all the technical stuff that you've done. It's really really cool.
The chapter structure,
Mhm.
it allows the contents of those chapters to be quite different, and you accept it as the viewer. And that's the other advantage of the non-linear and the chapter structure is it allows you to remove things, and people will fill in the gaps as long as the gaps aren't too big. Your mind will actually automatically go, oh yeah, that's 10 years later. You'll notice that dates only appear in the first few occasions, and after that they drop away because you've got used to the look of the actors in the different places and you no longer need the dates. Watch the making of video, it'll melt your brain.
Yeah.
A lot of people were just asking me, how the hell did you change that?
I did take a peek at it. I may not be able to see this in an actual movie theater, but I do have a VR headset, and I'm going to use there's a program you can use. There's a program you can use called Big Screen Beta, where you can actually watch movies in like a virtual theater. And I think I'm going to rewatch it like I'm in a theater,
cool,
just to get that kind of big screen experience with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to watch it in a movie theater because my local movie theater, they rent out one of the smaller screens for a couple of $100 if you do it like
now that's cool.
like on a Monday. If you do it on a Monday morning, they'll rent it out to you for sort of like $180. And I'm going to do that when my son's back in town, and we're going to go and watch this on the big screen privately, just us. For the record, no one else will be present.
Right. And like I say with all fan edits, it's like definitely pick up the 3 movies before you get it, because you got to support the director in the studio.
Without question, without exception.
Well, you've been an absolute pleasure to talk to.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to your reaction to the parallel Unbreakable glass split.
Right.
Well, for the record, I'll close with saying that I actually think M. Night's trilogy is superb, and I love Glass, and I love it even more now because I could see the discipline that he applied as a director from how he framed the actors and the shots that were parallel to earlier films, to the parallel dialogue that exists in Glass that people missed, and being able to hopefully bring those elements together and make them shine so you see those juxtapositions, hopefully will allow people to reevaluate their opinion of Glass. Because actually, the more I look at this and played with it and now rewatch it, I'm actually in awe that a director could come back to material he hadn't touched for 17 years and still frame Joseph and remember that he had Joseph center screen at the desk sitting, which is exactly how Joseph is sitting when he realizes his dad's a superhero at breakfast.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't come out in this edit because I didn't put that together, but in the parallel edit, it does. So a bit of a spoiler here. In the conversation with Dr. Ellie Staple in the parallel edit, there is a crossfade to young David from young Joseph to young Joseph from old Joseph. And when I put that together, I thought, yeah, I'll just crossfade there. And I put it together and I thought, oh my God, it isn't just that the framing is the same. The level of the desk and the breakfast table are virtually the same. The position of the actor's head is almost identical in the frame. It's astonishing. It was also the same at the end of Glass. The framing on Dr. Ellie Staple and Mrs. Price is virtually identical. And I won't tell you why and how I took advantage of that in the parallel edit, but I'll let you discover that.
The love you put in this, it definitely shows. Yeah, you did great.
It's not love. It's admiration of an author, and I really wanted to show people, guys, you missed what Knight was trying to tell you all. You just missed it. Here it is. Look, he wasn't taking a shortcut. He planned it for 20 years. He's not making it up. I remember reading about it. Hopefully, we've helped shine a light on his work.
Right. Yeah.
All I've done is taken his ingredients and mixed them in a different order. It's like making a bolognese. Right? You can fry the onions first, or you can put the onions in with the meat. It's entirely up to you what order you put the ingredients in. It's still going to be a bolognese, but it's going to have a different flavor. I'm not going to take the credit for anything other than juggling what he had in there. I think it's a work of genius. What he did was a work of genius, and and people just need to drill into it.
Yeah, I agree, but I also have to say that I think your edit makes it stronger. It just until I watch the parallel version, I definitely say like if anyone enjoys Unbreakable, Split, and Glass, they should definitely give this version a shot. Me personally, this is now like my preferred version of the movies, and guess I can't thank you enough for creating this. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you don't lose your mind when you watch the making of. It's very dense.
I did watch some of it, and I was just like, wow. It's always that I love making of stuff, seeing and I've seen a few small fan edit ones, but I haven't seen one this length, so I'm definitely ready to just dive into it and see your madness or genius, right, come into play of all the stuff you had to do.
Well, I was just getting so many questions. It was, in some respects, I thought it'd be easier to just
Yeah.
put it on an edit, and then of course it's quite intense trying to assemble something without dialogue that explains. But I figured it could be a bit of a kind of like an edit school for other would-be fan editors. Because George Lucas said famously about 30 years ago that filmmaking was going to be democratized by new technology. And this is what it looks like, and I'm glad that that Lucasfilm supports fan editors, and they have annual fan editors awards, and I'm hopefully reassured that the copyright owners here, who we are not trying to supplant, and copyright will never be asserted on these. You own this; it's your puppy. But given that Buena Vista is owned by Disney now, and Buena Vista were the production company, I hope that they will take an equally incisive attitude to this remixing as they do with their Star Wars properties, because no offense or supplantation is intended, just admiration and the sharing of genius. So fingers crossed on that.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. It was an absolute pleasure getting to interview you, and I
Thank
hope
you,
to
Hank.
check out more of your work and have you back on. Yeah.
Super. Enjoy the rest of your viewing then.
Yeah, I guess with that, yeah, this is Slaya with Wraith, and yeah, this was the interview of Split, Unbreakable, and Glass.